During the 1960s, the unified protest demonstrated by African Americans was unprecedented, and it still remains unrivaled by any racial group in U.S. history. Today, to the contrary, African Americans are now more divided than at any previous time in history. We also went from knowing that white oppressive forces were in fact our worst enemies to now perceiving ourselves as being our worst enemies. We also used to call the white oppressors crackers and call ourselves brothers and sisters. Today we now call them white people and call ourselves niggers and bitches. Clearly we've been made to respect them more and to respect ourselves less. We were once known following slavery as being a very dignified people. Now our culture is plagued with many vulgarities that we've normalized. We used to be proud of our African heritage. Now millions of us are ashamed of it. These profound changes within the African American culture clearly benefits the white society. Whenever the culture of the oppressed changes in ways that are beneficial to their oppressors, it is always by deliberate design of the oppressors. During the 1960s, it was determined by white social scientists that the emergence of the Black Pride movement had elevated the collective self-esteem of African Americans. Moreover, that it had a unifying effect on our culture that fueled the unprecedented unified Black protests of the 1960s. In the face of the unprecedented Black protests, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said that the unification of the American Negro was the greatest threat against the nation. It was determined that the African American culture had to be fundamentally changed in ways that served and protects the interests of the white society. White social scientists determined that this objective could be achieved by deploying an ideological subversion system against African Americans. Ideological subversion is an offensive psychological warfare tactic that uses misinformation and disinformation as a weapon to change people's behaviors and beliefs in ways that are against their own self-interest and that instead serve the interests of their oppressors. They deployed an ideological subversion system that perpetually negatively distorts everything that African Americans believes about ourselves. People are easily controlled by the information that they receive about themselves. When people constantly receive positive information about themselves, this raises their collective self-esteem and unifies them. However, when people constantly receive fraudulent negative information about themselves, the exact opposite happens. They become demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and more compliant with their oppressor's dominance over their lives. In fact, many will even prefer it. The unrelenting demoralization creates self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds a people, and they can then be ruled over forever. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most people will respond accordingly to the information because they've all been given the same information about themselves. This is precisely what white society is now doing to African Americans. Because white oppressive forces write all of our narrative, this allows them to easily negatively control what we believe about ourselves. White oppressive forces have desensitized us to the fact that they're the ones controlling everything that we believe about ourselves. It in fact gives them their greatest power over Black people. They keep us believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves in order to keep us demoralized, divided, keep our self-esteem low, and keep our collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected against ourselves. Keeping us within this condition is how they now prevent us from unifying ourselves against the white oppressive society. In 1968, white social scientists had also determined that African Americans had developed an allegiance toward Africa that hindered the growth of our allegiance toward the U.S. government. It was therefore decided that African Americans' allegiance towards Africa had to be eroded. To meet this objective, white propagandists began negatively distorting the image of Africa within the minds of African Americans. They constantly subject us to seeing only those images of war-torn, famine-ridden, rapidly illiterate, and disease-stricken Africa. By only showing us the poorest parts of Africa, this turned Africa into a source of shame and humiliation for many of us. It's easier to separate people from something they've been made to feel ashamed of. Those negative images also makes many African Americans perceive the enslavement of our ancestors as being more of a rescue mission that ultimately benefited us. This propaganda campaign literally causes many African Americans to feel grateful that slavery happened. This eroded our allegiance towards Africa and increased it towards the United States. They also attack our culture through their control over our media depictions. Those who control the people's media images control their culture because a group's identity is shaped by how they see themselves repeatedly depicted within the media. People often become those media depictions of themselves that they've accepted as being their reality. Because white oppressive forces controls our media images, they also covertly negatively steer our culture by negatively distorting our media images. Because we become those negative, derogatory, stereotyped caricatures of our racial group that the white society depicts of us that we've accepted as being our reality. It's a true hidden practice known as negative media social engineering. It's the true reason why millions of us now sags our pants, call some niggas and bitches, and glorifies pimps. Through media social engineering, white oppressive forces have negatively steer our culture while misleading us to believe that we are negatively steering ourselves. Through their monopoly over our narratives and media images, the white oppressors have deployed an ideological subversion system that has literally turned our culture upside down, while millions of us are kept ignorantly believing that our condition is caused by a silly slave syndrome myth, and even more ignorantly believing that a biblical fairy tale written by our most ungodliest enemies will not free us from them. Therefore, we remain as the white oppressors' fools. This horrible scenario is not being addressed because we no longer have true black leaders. We only have black puppets whose job descriptions are secretly limited to only symbolic protests. They show up whenever a black person is unjustly killed due to white racism, but they're not allowed to confront nor even speak of the many nefarious things that the white society does to black people as a means of maintaining their white dominance over black people. Regardless of how detrimental it is, they say nothing. They're actually gatekeepers for the system of white supremacy that merely gives us the illusion that we still have black leaders, but we do not. I've just presented to you our reality that we appropriately call the black people's matrix. This is the reality that we must function by. Because if our understandings of our plight and condition remains flawed, then all of our remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is the truth. This is the black people's matrix. Now, I've told you the truth, and right now I know I'm being shadow banned. I know the FBI's are looking at my videos. I speak the truth. And I know, given the history of this country, speaking the truth can get me killed. But I'm speaking the truth. Those who know the truth must speak, must tell the truth. One love and peace, brothers and sisters. Please share this video. Please share these videos. Please like my page and share stuff. We have to share the information, spread the information. Please do. One love and peace.